Friends, we're continuing in our series in the life of David. 1 Samuel chapter 20, David and Jonathan. Jonathan was Saul's son, and he and David were best of friends. In chapter 18, we saw David and Jonathan make their covenant of friendship. But now here in chapter 20, we see the fullness and richness of their friendship. Verses 41, if you're following. After the boy had gone, David got up from the south side of the stone and bowed down before Jonathan 3 times with his face to the ground. Then they kissed each other and wept together, but David wept the most. Jonathan said to David, "Go in peace, for we have sworn friendship with each other in the name of the Lord, saying, the Lord is witness between you and me, and between your descendants and my descendants forever." Then David left, and Jonathan went back to the town. What does it mean to be best friends? What moves us from the category of acquaintances to friends, to best friends? What are the marks of true friendship? Human beings were created to be relational, and friendships are an important part of our lives. People today spend hours every day on social networks like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, etc. And please, there's nothing wrong with interacting with others in this way. In fact, one could argue social media offers one of the greatest tools the church has ever had for reaching the world with the gospel. But in a day when it's getting easy to neglect real relationships, let's remember why we're connecting with others in the first place. One author says, life is so much richer when we have friends with whom we can share our joys and troubles. Real relationships aren't built by posting updates or tweeting and retweeting the most thought-provoking quotes. It takes more time than that. The greatest social networking involves meeting someone's needs in a way that never would have happened without a one-to-one connection. We need friends, people we bond with in mutual affection. In Scripture, we read what a true friend should be. A true friend gives heartfelt advice. A true friend rebukes when necessary, but correction is done in love. A true friend avoids gossip. A true friend forgives and doesn't hold grudges. A true friend helps in times of need. I remember back in my junior school days learning this little saying I've never forgotten. To give advice is very nice, but friends should do much more. Friends should always help a friend. That's what friends are for. Nothing's ever lost, is it? You know, way back in school, 50 years now. Friendship can also have its negative aspects as well, can't it? Supposed friends can lead us to sin. A friend can lead us astray spiritually, as Israel was warned about in Deuteronomy chapter 13, verses 6 to 11. Even well-intentioned friends can provide false comfort and give bad advice, as Job's friends did, making his suffering worse and displeasing the Lord. People we thought were friends can sadly prove false, deserting us when our friendship no longer benefits them. For all these reasons and more, friends should be chosen carefully. As the Apostle Paul taught, bad company corrupts good character, 1 Corinthians 15 verse 33. One of the greatest biblical examples of friendship is David and Jonathan. They were devoted friends, soulmates. Let's come to our passage if you're following. After fleeing from Naioth, David came to Jonathan to try and find out why Saul was so intent on his destruction. What had he done to cause Saul to seek his life? At this point, you see in our study of David, Jonathan is not convinced that Saul still wants to kill David. After all, didn't Saul make an oath to Jonathan that David would not be put to death? 1 Samuel 19 verse 6. Jonathan still believed that his father would not really harm David without telling him, his son. But David was not so sure, for he rightly discerned that Saul would not reveal his true intentions to Jonathan, knowing of his friendship with David. And yet, although Jonathan is not 100% sure, he still makes himself available to David and tells him in verse 4, "Whatever you want me to do, I'll do it for you." True friends are committed to being always available. Verse 5. The beginning of the month at the new moon was a special time of sacrifice and celebration. David's presence at the court would have been taken for granted. So a test, friends, was proposed that would make it crystal clear whether David was in danger or not. Instead of taking his place at the royal table for the monthly feast, David would remain absent. If Saul inquired as to his absence, Jonathan would explain that he had gone to the early sacrifice at Bethlehem. This might have been true, even though this sacrifice trip to Bethlehem is not recorded in Scripture. If Saul didn't object, this would show that David was safe. But if Saul reacted with hostility, if Saul lost his temper and became angry as to his absence, it would indicate that all was not well. And Jonathan would know that David was in grave danger. Jonathan, in those couple of verses there, 5 to 8, commits to being truthful with David about his father Saul, even if it's bad news. Verse 9, "If I had the least inkling that my father was determined to harm you, wouldn't I tell you," he says. Of course he would. Truthfulness is another basic commitment of friendship. Friends tell each other the truth, even when the truth hurts, even when the truth may be something we don't want to hear. David trusts Jonathan to tell him the truth, but he still wants to know the plan, verse 10. Who will tell him if Saul answers Jonathan harshly? Verse 11, "Come," Jonathan said, "let's go out in the field." Then Jonathan said to David, "I promise by the Lord God of Israel that by this time tomorrow or the next day at the latest, I will talk to my father and let you know at once how he feels about you. If he speaks favourably about you, I will let you know." Verse 13, "If he is angry and wants you killed, may the Lord kill me if I don't warn you so you can escape and live. May the Lord be with you as he used to be with my father." Verse 14, "But show me unfailing kindness like that of the Lord, as long as I live, so that I may not be killed. And do not ever cut off your kindness from my family, not even when the Lord destroys all your enemies." Verse 16, "So Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, May the Lord destroy all your enemies. And Jonathan made David reaffirm his vow, his oath of friendship again, because he loved him as he loved himself, for he loved him as he loved his own soul." In those verses, Jonathan commits loyalty to David, and he asks David to pledge loyalty to him as well. He promises to give David the correct message on the third day of the feast, so he would know whether the king was friendly or angry. Jonathan goes beyond the immediate crisis to deal with future events in those verses we just read, for he knew that David would one day become king. Jonathan knew that the throne rights vested in him would one day be David's, and he asks if anything happened to him, David would promise not to wipe out his household, and David agrees. Now, there's no mention here of a covenant sacrifice, as we read in Genesis chapter 15, or the signing of a covenant document, because the mutual love these two men had for the Lord and for each other was sufficient to make this verbal agreement binding. Friendship, you see, is a two-way street. True friendship is never one-sided. Yes, you can befriend a person who does not reciprocate, but you cannot be friends with someone unless it's both ways. Some people are friendless because they are not prepared to give as well as to take. You know people like that than I do. True friendship is built on mutual love, loyalty and self-denial. True friends are like diamonds, precious but rare. False friends are like autumn leaves, found everywhere. Verse 18 to 23. Those verses there detail the sign by which David would be notified as to the king's attitude towards him. You see, it doesn't do any good as friends to make commitments if we don't act on them. And that's what we see here in these verses. Jonathan and David acting on their commitments to each other. They're watching out for each other. Jonathan would come to the field and shoot some arrows near a rock, near the stone Ezer, where David would be hiding. The directions he called to the lad who would fetch the arrows would tell David to flee for his life or return to the court in safety. Verse 24. So David hid in the field, and when the new moon festival came, the king sat down to eat. He sat in his customary place by the wall. Saul always sat with his back against the wall. Opposite Jonathan, and Abner sat next to Saul, but David's place was empty. Saul said nothing that day, for he thought something must have happened to David to make him ceremonially unclean. Verse 27, but the next day, the second day of the month, David's place was empty again. Suspicious of anything out of the ordinary with regard to his official staff, Saul asks his son Jonathan, why hasn't the son of Jesse come to the meal either yesterday or today? Jonathan answers with the excuse he and David had rehearsed. David earnestly asked me for permission to go to Bethlehem because his family are observing a sacrifice in the town, and I granted it, he says. It's no big problem, is it? But it's a problem to Saul. It's a problem to Saul. It's a big problem. You see, friends, when hateful feelings are in the heart, it doesn't take much for angry words to come out of the mouth. Matthew 12, verse 34b, for out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. Verse 30, Saul's anger flared up at Jonathan. Instead of attacking David, look, King Saul attacks his own son. And he said to him, you son of a perverse and rebellious woman. This is strong language. You son of a perverse and rebellious woman, don't I know that you have sided with the son of Jesse to your own shame and to the shame of your mother who bore you? Now send him and bring him to me, for he must die. But verse 32, Jonathan speaks up for David. That's what friends do. They speak up, they support and speak up for one another. Why should he be put to death? What has he done? He asks his father. With that, Saul hurls his spear at his own son, transferring his hatred for David momentarily to Jonathan. Jonathan is deeply grieved, verse 34. But his grief, you will note if you're following, is not due to the humiliation his father has heaped upon him at the dinner table, oh no, but due to the way his father had dishonoured David. David had been right all along, you see. My father does intend to kill him, and will also kill anyone who tries to stop him from doing so. Verses 34 to 42. True friends keep their promises. For it's now time for Jonathan to carry out their plan completely. He must convey to David that he was right, that Saul does intend to kill him. So Jonathan goes out to the field with one of his young attendants, where he knows David is hiding and watching. And as promised, he shot 3 arrows, verse 20, one of which was sent far beyond the boy, making it necessary for Jonathan to shout to the lad. But his words were meant for David's ears. Hurry, go quickly, don't stop, don't linger, make speed, haste, stay not, the Authorized Version reads. When the boy came back with the arrows, Jonathan gave him the bow and sent him back to the town. After the boy had gone, verse 41, David got up from the south side of the stone and bowed down before Jonathan 3 times with his face to the ground. That was an expression, friends, of extreme respect for one another. It was an expression of extreme respect for his friend on David's part. They kissed each other, an Eastern custom even today when bidding farewell to a friend. They embrace, they weep together, a sign of a deep love and affection. But David wept the most as they said goodbye. Jonathan said to David, verse 42, "Go in peace, for we have sworn friendship with each other in the name of the Lord." That's important, isn't it? Their friendship was not inappropriate. Their friendship was not inappropriate, as some would like to suggest of the world. It was a friendship in the name and before the Lord. Both men reaffirmed their covenant, knowing that the Lord had heard their words and saw their hearts. Then David left. He more or less, friends, went into hiding. It was a necessary part of God's plan to prepare him for the throne. And Jonathan went back to the town. What's the application? What's the application? A friend is one of the greatest blessings on earth. And loyalty is one of life's most costliest qualities. You see, to be loyal, you cannot live only for yourself. Loyal people not only stand by their commitments, but are willing to suffer for them as well. Jonathan, in our chapter, is a shining example of loyalty. Sometimes he was forced to deal with conflicting loyalties. That is, to his father and to his best friend David. Truth and his relationship with God is what guided Jonathan's loyalty. It was his loyalty to God which guided him through the conflicting demands of his human relationships. True friendships are glued together with bonds of loyalty and commitment. They remain intact despite changing external circumstances. Sadly, as we know and are probably well aware, the great dividing force of many a friendship can be jealousy. Envy over what a friend has can soon turn to anger and bitterness, causing you to separate yourself from the one you once truly cared for. As we've gone through this chapter, an overview, so to speak, can I ask you gently, what kind of friend are you? I preach to myself. What kind of friend are you? Affection is better than gold. Sympathy is better than lands. Are we supportive? Are we emotionally available and trustworthy? Are we somebody with whom a person can share their innermost thoughts with? And those thoughts will remain between the two of us. Is that you? Can you hold your water? Let's put it like that. Christian brother, Christian sister, real friendship is imitating Christ in our relationships. We are to love each other as Jesus loved us, and he loved us enough to give his life for us. God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him shall not perish, but have everlasting life. We may not have to die for someone, but there are other ways to practice sacrificial love. Listening, helping, encouraging, giving. And remember, please, many a needy person has been won to Christ after a Christian had befriended them. That's true. Can I ask you again, do you know of someone who needs this kind of love today? Will you seek to be a better friend with your friends? Will I seek to be a better friend with my friends? Perhaps there's someone here this afternoon and you're saying to yourself, I don't have a friend in the world. Let me say this. There's always a friend in heaven who loves you. There's always a friend in heaven who loves you. The greatest friend anyone could possibly have is Jesus Christ. He's the one who comes in when all the world goes out. He's the one who knows all about you, warts and all, and yet still loves you. As God came to the Ur of the Chaldees thousands of years ago to seek Abraham, to train and to tutor him as his friend, so the Lord comes to your street, he comes to your home, and he comes to your heart today, seeking your friendship. Will you call on him today if you haven't already? Will you turn to him today if you haven't already? Come and be wise. Come and be happy. Come and be safe. I found a friend, or such a friend. He loved me ere I knew him. He drew me with the cords of love, and thus he bound me to him. And round my heart still closely twine those ties which naught can sever. For I am his, and he is mine, forever and forever. Why not call on him today and go away from this service rejoicing in a friendship that sticketh closer than a brother? For his name's sake. Amen.